Colleen and Christy. As you guys know, that this is definitely not my forte, but those presentations seem to be right on point and also clearly important to the audience members that we have out there. But it also inspires me to want to throw a pitch, but without a product. And that's my first question to each of you. Can one do that? Can they show a target is critical for tumor survival with siRNA or some type of conditional knockout and have no product at all? No drug, no antagonist, no antibody, just the science. Can I protect that? And will you fund me to develop a product or multiple products to target that science? And I thought I would ask Deepa that question, but I think she answered it during her presentation, and I think her answer is no. So I thought NCI would have more flexibility there. I'm going to throw it out to Colleen first to see if you guys will jump on that.
It's a great question, Jeff, and the answer is an unsatisfying one, which is it depends. So yes, we have funded opportunities that are very early stage and are just a target that's identified with a really great team of founders. And we have to go out and do the discovery work and find that molecule and file the intellectual property. So it really just depends on the elements of the specific opportunity. And we have done those successfully in the past, but we have to be convinced that the science is so interesting that if successful, it's worth the effort, and that the founders are people that we really want to work with and think can contribute in a significant way. So if you have an idea, please come talk to us. We're always willing to chat.
I wish. Thanks. Christy, do you have any comments to add on that?
Sure. What I would say is very similar to Colleen, is that it all depends. But if, for example, it is a trusted scientific colleague that you've worked with before or has started a company in the past, and they have a really good idea, but they don't have the specifics ready yet, we have done that where we've talked to them. Unfortunately, what you need to hear is that you might talk to us for a year before we would fund it, because we would need a number of answers. But it can be done, and certainly in the current environment with a lot of great science bubbling up through academia and elsewhere, I think it's possible.
Thanks, Christy. If you could go in and lower your volume a little bit on your mic, there'll be less S's getting hissed at by us. I wanted one of Colleen's comments, and it's one of the questions from the audience, and it's all kind of dear to my heart. Is how to find out the available compounds that can be licensed. What is the procedure? Whom to contact? And I think this is a great question. I'm going to throw that first to Deepa, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Let me answer that first. The earlier question too, Jeff, about us not funding, early stage products. So we typically don't fund a lot of sort of screening and kind of studies, but it's not that we have never funded it before. So if there is something that is a very something that's never been seen in our portfolio, very innovative, we will fund it. So the answer, like Colleen and Christy, is really, it depends. So now to answer the other question that you have about compounds. I think there were some questions about licensing compounds from NCI and NIH. So that's definitely possible. Our office is not the one that does it, but the technology transfer office at NCI is the one that people need to contact if they need to license compounds that have been developed at NIH. I hope that answers that question.
It does, but let's say I'm an investigator out there and I have a pathway. I found a kinase or I found a G protein. Is there some systematic way for me to go in and see if there's a structure that inhibits that particular pathway or protein?
So I'm not really familiar with how the technology transfer office lists this internal NIH compounds. So that's one way. The other way to do really is to see what else NIH has funded in this area. And there's a database called Project Reporter, which is a list of whatever NIH has funded. So if you put in keywords, it'll tell you who else NIH has funded and is working in that particular space. So that may be another way to to find researchers in that space or compounds in that space that people are working on.
Great, thanks. And I'm going to throw one more quick question to you because it seems relevant. I can't abhor doing grant applications, and one of the questions is, what is the success rate for SBIR, STTR programs? Is it as low as 10% or even lower, or is it better?
So the phase 1 awards that we have, our success rates has been around 10 to 15%. It varies year to year depending on what comes in, but it's around 10 to 15% for NCI. Our phase 2 success rates, it has generally been about 25% or more. So our phase 2 success rates are actually better because you have the preliminary data. People have done the work. There's some track record, so it helps. So that's usually the success rate.
Thanks, Deepa. The next question is for Colleen, and it's from our audience. If you're a first-time CEO in biotech and looking for VC funding, is it better to try to hire someone with biotech experience before you pitch, or to say that you recognize the need for biotech experience and you're open to the VCs bringing in their own person to help after Series A funding? That's a good question. Would you rather put your own people in there, or would you rather have them come with their team?
It's an excellent question that I think we get a lot. And, both Christy and I made comments about how different firms have different models. And I would say if you're pitching to early stage investors like Christy's firm and mine, we're not afraid to roll up our sleeves and help recruit a team. And so in that case, because we cannot understate cannot overstate the importance of the team, it is so critical in what we do that I think my preference would be to actually have a say in who gets recruited. But there's really no right or wrong answer. And if you have the ability to recruit a really experienced person who's been successful in the past, and you match them up with a first-time, really hungry biotech CEO, I think that can be an excellent team that would have us interested in investing. So there's really no right or wrong answer, but firms like mine and Christie's are not afraid to help recruit the team. So if you don't have someone identified, you shouldn't be afraid to speak with us at the point where you still need to recruit, and just be open about it.
Great, thanks. And here's another question I'm going to throw to Christy first. What do you value most in potential investments in the Series A stage? The science, the IP, the team, the preclinical, the CMC. Are there deal breakers or complete deficiencies where at FDA you're going on hold? Do you guys just say that this can't move any farther forward until you address these? Christy?
Yes, it's a great question, and again, this is one of those answers where it somewhat depends. But what I would say is, first, we have to believe in the science. We have to believe there is enough early data that suggests that it does have a shot at working. In terms of the team, it's most important that whatever team they have in place at the time can be trusted. We feel like they're trustable. And to this point about first-time CEOs, or I've never been a CEO before, of course, there are many biotech companies today that are even public that are first-time CEOs. So that's okay. We'll work with you and help you. And just like Colleen said, we like to roll up our sleeves and do a lot of heavy lifting in the process. So I think it does depend somewhat. In terms of deal breakers, if we feel the team is not trustable, that's a deal breaker. If we feel that the science, something just doesn't feel right about it, after we do some diligence and we just can't quite believe it, those would be deal breakers. But it is really the combination of factors, not one single factor, that would determine whether we would be interested. And that's why it's a bit of a longer process. And as I mentioned, we look at a lot of companies before we come up with those 6 to 8 that we're going to invest in.
Great, thanks, Christy. Try to move the mic back a little bit from your mouth and/or lower that volume as well. And I think Jeff Kelly's going to try to help you with that. one of the questions that was in the chat box was, and it goes along this lines as well. I assume that if you do your due diligence for IP and someone else has already protected this, it's not a wise investment. But how did that IP, these small companies with 3 people, they do their own IP and then you do your own IP, and then one of the questions was, do you let them know what your IP showed? And I mean, I'm assuming it sounds like there's kind of a collegial interaction between you guys, but would those kind of things be discussed? I'm going to throw this to Colleen first.
Yeah, so I think what you're asking about is, do we share our conclusions? And the answer is yes. And we really view our investments as partnerships. These are long-term relationships. We are often working with the founders and management teams for 5-7 years. And so we really do view them as partnerships, and we're in this together, right? When the company's successful, everyone wins. So we really try to start that relationship building and that partnership aspect in the due diligence process. And so it is very collaborative and collegial. We're asking questions, but we're trying to work together, and we make suggestions for experiments that we think could strengthen the proposal. And we do share the conclusions of our diligence, and absolutely, if we uncover something that we think could really make the pitch stronger, we share that with the company. And even if we don't in the end make an investment decision and partner, we try to provide some feedback that will help the company be more successful.
Thanks, Colleen. Another question, you guys see 600 different pitches and data and submissions and a year. How, every time I talk and it's to the public, I have to try to remember, is that proprietary or have I seen that published? And sometimes it stifles the conversation because you're not really sure. How do you guys do that when you see a lot of proprietary confidential stuff, but then you're also expected to guide and lead other companies and some of that? How do you guys manage that? And I'm going to throw this to Christy.
Okay, hopefully my mic is a little bit better right now. Let me know if not. So obviously, okay, terrific. I would say that every venture firm sees a different number of companies a year. I'm giving you our number, and when I joined 10 years ago, it was more like 200 or 300. So we're seeing a ton of deal flow right now. I'm sure Colleen would say the same, probably even more than we are. The first thing we do is we look at non-confidential information, and it's only with certain companies, once we get more interested, that we'll ask to go under an NDA, or they'll ask us, would you sign a confidentiality agreement with us to protect the information. We do have to be very careful, of course, because we're seeing so many things, that we make sure that we're not using information that we have toward helping somebody else. So I think we have to be very cautious about it. But I would love to hear Colleen's answer as well.
Yeah, I think erring on the side of caution is typically the way I go. So I agree with Christy. A lot of our interactions with companies are non-confidential, and that's really how we handle our first introductory meeting for every company we talk with. But because we do go under confidentiality with a lot of companies, we just have to be very, very cautious and be careful not to reveal anything that we learned in another meeting. And keeping track of what is confidential and non-confidential is difficult. So in that case, I just err on the side of caution and try not to share anything that I've learned from another company.
Thanks, guys. Another question that I'll throw out to the group: do you believe that investors will remain strongly interested in the oncology space, and why? How does FDA factor into that equation? I'm hoping the metaphorical there, the cure to many cancers is, only 50 years away. But I suppose 50 years is plenty of time for investment. But how do you guys see that? We'll start with we'll start with Colleen and go to Christy.
Yeah. So in short, I don't see the amount of investment going into oncology slowing anytime soon. And probably the biggest reason, so there are several factors driving the disproportionate amount of investment dollars going into oncology over any other therapeutic area right now. But maybe one of the largest drivers of that trend is pharma's interest. And, I talked about the exit paths that exist for our companies. But for us, our job as partners in venture firms is to generate a return on investment. And that's how we're judged. And so to make our company successful, we really have to have pharma companies that are interested in picking up the assets. And because pharma has such an interest in oncology drug development, that has been driving a lot of the exits in the area. And so when we look at investment opportunities, we have to think about, is there a path to generate a return here? And because there are 20 or more pharma companies that are potential buyers that have oncology programs, it makes it a bit of an easier case than if you're working in a therapeutic area where I struggle to list 3 companies that could be potential buyers. The question about how FDA can play a role, another one of the major factors is speed to data in the clinic. Because of course, a major inflection point for all companies is to generate clinical data. And with oncology being able to go into patients quickly, being able to select patients, being able to use biomarkers, companion diagnostics to select those patients, that all does really help in generating data as rapidly as possible in the clinic.
Christy?
I think Colleen answered it perfectly, but I will just reiterate the importance of meeting with the FDA early and really being able to articulate to the investors what the FDA has said. And of course, we would like to see the FDA minutes under CDER, of course. So I think what's happened over the last 10 years is there's been an unbelievable acceleration of great science in the oncology space. I don't see that slowing down, just like Colleen said. Pharma's interest and all of the IPOs that are happening in biotech just continue to lead investors to want to look at as many oncology companies that come our way. So it's not slowing down anytime soon. And I do want to put in a plug here for Deepa and the NCI. They've done a fantastic job shepherding early pipeline products and companies that come our way, which has really empowered, I think, a lot of great science moving forward.
Thanks, Christy. And I'm gonna. We only have a little bit of time left, but I really want to ask this question, which goes to all 3 of you guys. And clearly, as we stated before, and you guys all have stated, the precision medicine is driving oncology development because we can identify patients who are going to respond. But when that precision medicine goes to the point where it's almost personalized medicine, at what point do you guys say, that this isn't fun, this isn't economically viable? And that's happening more and more. I just heard a talk the other day for medulloblastoma, which is already rare, and there must be 30 different transcriptomic groups that medulloblastoma can be grouped into, and all of those could potentially have science that avails themselves to particular therapies, but the patient populations are going to be exceedingly small. I'm going to throw this to Deepa because I know she has some ideas about how we might help with that, and then to you guys about how if those are even fundable.
So thank you, Jeff. So one of the things that we do at NCI is to fund these kinds of technologies that, the private sector may not fund, early enough, because that's the role of NCI. And we will, our goal is to fund these technologies and de-risk them enough and make sure that they have exciting data that the private sector eventually will get interested. So that's one of the roles that we play at NCI, is to seed these emerging, seed these technologies and to really help fund them. So that's one thing that we do. We are, we are seeing an increased focus in personalized medicine, like you said, and we are really trying to fund some more of these rare cancers that we typically don't fund otherwise. So that's the NCI answer.
Thanks, Deepa. So let's pretend that NCI de-risked a program to the point where they did all the toxicology data on a particular molecule that, inhibited dimerization of a translocated transcription factor. And Colleen and Christy, it's 200 patients a year. Is that gonna fly? And I'm gonna throw it to Christy first.
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. I would say 200 is pretty low, but it depends on whether the technology has utility with something beyond the 200 patients, or if, in fact, there really are more patients than you think, but they haven't been diagnosed. And I'm going to give you an example outside of oncology that might be relevant here. Years ago, cystic fibrosis was not considered something to invest in because it was too small. It was orphan, and that was before ultra-orphan diseases became very popular. But in fact, if you look now at all the products in the CF space, it started really small with one genetic mutation, and it really exploded from there because there were multiple other mutations. So I think if it's worthy, if it's really a high unmet medical need, if there's a disease foundation that can help back it, if the NIH really helps move it forward. What we like is when the pathway is short. So time is money. So big indications often take a lot longer time to get there. Smaller indications sometimes can get there very quickly. So unfortunately, it's a little bit of it all depends. But I'll hand it over to Colleen to answer it more fully.
Well, no surprise, I completely agree with everything Christy said. And yeah, there are some advantages actually where you might be able to get approval on dozens of patients, and we've seen that happen for very rare populations. So we don't have internally a cutoff of a certain number of patients that makes something not viable. So it all just depends on, what we think pharma's level of interest is. And I can tell you right now that there are pharma companies that are saying they aren't thinking about the patient population. They just want to see drugs that work, and no patient population is too small for them to consider. So as long as that trend continues, premium pricing continues, and it's going to be a real game changer for patients. We're not talking about incremental benefit, but really moving the needle for patients. Then I think we consider very rare populations. But it does all depend on all the different factors. And you heard both of us talk about the different criteria that we look at, and it kind of all rolls up into our assessment.
That's great. Thanks, Colleen. And would you mind sending me a list of those big pharma companies that are doing that? I'd love to see that. Honestly, I think we could go right through lunch with all the questions that are coming in for these three. However, our time is about up, or actually is up. And I'd like to thank Deepa, Colleen, and Christy again for their efforts and experience in trying to help everyone out there keep their lights on. So I'm going to turn this